Hey guys, in this video, we're going to look at some fractions. Let's get started. In today's video, we're going to cover these 5 items. We're going to start with understanding what a fraction is, then we'll define some common terminology, we'll explore some very basic properties, and then we'll wrap up with some applications and examples. Let's jump in. Let's begin with the most obvious question here. What is a fraction? A fraction is just a simple way to express part of a whole. Now, you can appreciate why that would be helpful in real life, because in real life, we sometimes only deal with a part of something or a part of a quantity. And so keeping track of that in the form of a fraction is very useful. So let's take a look at a real example here. Let's say you had a pizza. There's your pizza. And let's divide this pizza into 8 slices, just like that. And let us suppose you're a bit hungry, so you decided to eat 3 slices. So if I asked you in plain old English, how much did you eat? The answer is quite simple. You ate 3 out of 8 slices. And if you were to express that mathematically as a fraction, it would simply be 3 over 8, or 3/8. And that right there is all a fraction is. It's just a mathematical way to express part of a whole. Now, if I continued with this example and asked you how many slices were remaining, then as a fraction, that would just be 5/8. If I asked you to express a single slice as a fraction, that would simply be 1/8. And if your friend came over and ate 2 slices, then once again, as a fraction, that would simply be 2/8. Now, if you think carefully, you can extend this logic to many situations. Say you wrote a test, and let's say this test was out of 46 marks, and you scored 42 marks. Well, then your score expressed as a fraction would simply be 42 over 46, or 42/46. Same thing if you were to do some chores at home. Let's say you had 3 chores, and you've only completed 2. Then as a fraction, that would simply be 2 over 3, or 2/3. Now, before we get any further, I think it's useful to discuss some terminology. A fraction basically consists of 2 parts, the numerator and the denominator. The numerator is just a fancy way of addressing the top term, and the denominator is just a fancy way of addressing the bottom term. So using our pizza example, we see that the numerator would be 3 and the denominator would be 8. Moving on to some more terms, we can also have different kinds of fractions. So fractions can be either proper, improper, or mixed. In a proper fraction, the numerator is less than the denominator. In an improper fraction, the numerator is greater than or equal to the denominator. And finally, we have mixed fractions, which is just a combination of whole number and fraction. Let's move on to some properties now. In a fraction, when the numerator equals the denominator, the fraction is considered to be whole. It's considered to be complete. So going with our previous examples, if you ate all 8 slices of your pizza, meaning your fraction would look like 8 over 8, that would mean that you finished the entire pizza. Similarly, if you scored 46 marks out of 46 marks in your test, that means that you would have received full marks or completed that test in its entirety. And lastly, if you had done all 3 chores at home, you would have completed the entire set of chores, let's say for that day. And so if we take this further, then mathematically we could express that wholeness as 1. And this makes sense because in the case of the pizza, eating all 8 slices means you finished that entire pizza. In the case of the test, receiving all marks means you successfully completed and answered all questions on the test. And in the case of the chores, it means that you completed 1 full set of chores. And so just to put the icing on the cake here, we can take it one final step and say that these fractions, since they all equal 1, they are mathematically equivalent to each other because they all represent the same mathematical quantity, which is 1. And this actually helps us segue well into the next property, known as equivalent fractions. Equivalent fractions are just fractions that look different, meaning they have different numbers in the numerator and the denominator, but actually they represent the exact same quantity. And we can illustrate this once again with our pizza example. So the leftmost fraction in this case would be if we cut the pizza into 2 slices but ate 1. The middle fraction being if we cut it into 4 slices but ate 2. And the last one being if we cut the pizza into 8 slices but we ate 4. So just by visual inspections, we can see that these are the same amount and therefore equivalent. Now, you may be wondering, that's great, but what's going on mathematically? Well, mathematically, all we're doing is just multiplying each fraction by the same number, and that same number is just the number 1. So let's look at this more closely. I'm going to take the 4 over 8 out, just to make the example simpler. There you go. And I'm going to rewrite just the first fraction above. So now we have half equals a half. All good. Now I'm going to multiply both the numerator and the denominator of the second fraction by the same number. And I'm going to choose the number 2. Now notice that just like our previous example where we had 8 over 8 equals 1, 46 over 46 equals 1, this 2 over 2 also just equals 1 because the numerator and the denominator is the same. And so I haven't broken any math rules by simply multiplying my original fraction by 1. So moving on, the way to multiply a fraction is to multiply the numerators by each other and the denominators by each other. So we have 2 times 1 equals 2, and 2 times 2 equals 4, giving us 2 over 4. And so both of these fractions, the top fraction and the bottom fraction, equal each other. All right, so lastly, before we wrap up, I just wanted to share some applications and additional examples of fractions. Recall what I said in the beginning of this video, that a fraction is simply any quantity dealing with part of a whole. We've already looked at examples covering food, so I'm not going to go over that again. Let's look at some other quantities instead. Fractions can be used when measuring distance, for example. Say you were going to your friend's house, which was 7 kilometers away. If 2 kilometers later you wanted to express the distance you've covered as a fraction, then that would simply be 2/7. Similarly, after 4 kilometers, it would just be 4/7, and after 5 kilometers, it would be 5/7, etc., etc. We can also use fractions when dealing with money. Say you earned 30 bucks, and you wanted to save a third of your money, 1/3, that would simply translate into 10 bucks. And consequently, if you wanted to spend 2/3 of your money, then that would simply translate into 20 bucks. Now, these were just simple examples. We could take this concept and apply it to an infinite number of situations, not just those involving food, distance, money, but pretty much any quantity worth measuring. For now, I think it's a good place to wrap up though. So let's just go ahead and recap. Remember, a fraction is just a simple way to express part of a whole. It consists of a numerator and a denominator. Fractions can be proper, improper, or mixed. When the numerator equals the denominator, the fraction is considered whole. We talked about equivalent fractions. And we also learned that fractions have countless examples and applications in real life. All right, guys, that's all for this video. I hope you learned something. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in another video.